Okay, thank you everybody for joining in. On behalf of Women for Biodiversity, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists and to everyone else who has joined us today. The session today is the second in a series where we are preparing for COP16 next month. Last week, we addressed gender and environmental data linkages, and today we are going to be speaking about the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the monitoring framework, and aspects related to gender. We are co-hosting this webinar with the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership, GIZ, and UN Women. And I would especially like to thank the teams, especially Maren Kroschar from the NBSAP Accelerator Partnership, Miguel Schmitter and Harmony Nukoya from GIZ, and Wenge Murongo from the UN Women for extending their support and helping with the webinar. Shruti, we can move to slide 2. Yes. So before we begin, there are a few suggestions for all the participants. The webinar is going to be translated in French and Spanish. So I would encourage you to click on the globe icon on the screen below and select the language of your choice. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our translators who are doing an amazing job for us for the last few webinars that we've been organizing. So thank you so much. Also, please type your questions or suggestions in the chat box. And to all the participants, please ensure that your microphones and videos are kept off so that you can hear the panelists as they are speaking. Next slide, Shruti. Yeah. So today we will begin our session with a welcome address by our director, Ms. Mrinalini Rai. She could not be here, but she has sent a video message. So Shruti, if you could just play the message for us.
And good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you all in today's information session that we are organizing prior to the CBD COP16, which is going to be taking place next month in Cali. As we implement the KM-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it's essential to remember that biodiversity loss and environmental degradation do not affect all communities equally. Women, indigenous peoples, local communities, and marginalized groups are often disproportionately impacted. They are also key stakeholders, possessing invaluable knowledge and skills that are crucial for the realization of the 4 goals and 23 targets of the KM-GBF. To address these challenges effectively, we must ensure that our biodiversity policies are gender responsive and inclusive. Gender responsive biodiversity planning means incorporating a gender perspective into every stages of our environmental strategies. This includes empowering women and girls, ensuring their participation in decision-making processes, and recognizing their roles as custodians of biodiversity. Effective gender-responsive planning requires strong policies that address the specific challenges women face, such as unequal access to lands and resources, lack of representation in decision-making spaces, and insufficient financial support for their initiatives. While there has been significant progress, challenges remain in monitoring and reporting gender impacts within the KMGBF. One of the key issues is a lack of gender disaggregated data, which hampers our ability to track progress effectively. Without accurate data, it is difficult to assess whether our policies are truly advancing gender equality and biodiversity goals. Additionally, many local and community-led conservation efforts are not adequately recognized or documented in national and global reporting frameworks. This disconnect often leads to underrepresentation of the gendered impacts of biodiversity loss and the contributions of women and indigenous peoples. By adopting gender responsive approaches, we can create policies that empower women, indigenous peoples, and other major rights holders whose livelihoods and knowledge are often directly linked to biodiversity. Monitoring and reporting efforts that incorporate gender disaggregated data will enable us to track progress, identify gaps, and refine our actions in ways that promote both biodiversity conservation and gender equality. Together, let's prioritize policies and practices that leave no one behind as we strive to achieve the goals of the KMGBF. Looking ahead at COP16, our aspirations should be to strengthen the mechanisms that allow for gender responsive implementation of the KMGBF. We need to build on the progress made so far by adopting policies that prioritize gender equality, establishing stronger partnerships between governments, civil society, women's organizations, and ensuring that gender responsive planning becomes a standard in all biodiversity related frameworks. At COP16, we should also aim to introduce more robust gender monitoring and reporting mechanisms. This includes developing standardized methods for collecting gender disaggregated data, fostering collaboration between governments and local communities, and ensuring that the voices of women, particularly from indigenous peoples and local communities and other marginalized groups, are amplified and heard. And of course, we are looking forward to the adoption for the indicator methodology to measure progress towards Target 23. Gender responsive biodiversity planning is not just a matter of equity, it is a crucial component of achieving our biodiversity goals. We must remain committed to integrating gender into every aspect of our biodiversity strategies, overcoming the challenges of monitoring and reporting, and ensuring that our work leads to tangible, equitable outcomes as we move towards COP16 and beyond. Monitoring and reporting efforts that incorporate gender disaggregated data will enable us to track progress, identify gaps, and refine our actions in ways that promote both biodiversity conservation and gender equality. Together, let's prioritize and practice that leaves no one behind as we strive to achieve goals of the KMGBF. Unfortunately, I am unable to be with all of you, but hope to meet some of you in less than a month's time in Cali. Hope you will enjoy this information webinar as much as we have put in the effort of putting it together, and also taking the opportunity to thanking my team who has worked really hard on this. So thank you, and have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening.
Thank you so much, Nalini. Shruti, could you also share the screen? Yes, thank you. We also have Ms. Gillian Campbell, who is the head of monitoring, review, and reporting at the Secretariat for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And she has led the development and operationalization of the monitoring framework of the KMGBF. She's also managing efforts related to planning, monitoring, and reporting to the parties of the convention. I would now like to ask Ms. Campbell to guide us through some of the points around gender and the monitoring framework that we should look forward to this year at COP. Ms. Gillian?
Hey, good morning, everyone, or afternoon. It's nice to be here with you today. I'm not going to share any slides either, but I just wanted to say that as we're going to COP, I think that there has been tremendous uptake already of gender in BSAPs. And I'm going to show you if I can share my screen. I'm going to show you what we're seeing right now in terms of countries committing towards making commitments towards the global biodiversity framework. So this is the the countries that have submitted national targets in the ORT. So this is ort.cbd.it, and you can see that already we have, yeah.
Your sound is not very clear. So what you could do is if you could switch off your camera, maybe it's the bandwidth that's causing an issue.
Can you hear me better now?
Slightly better. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'll also get a little closer. So as you can see, there's 70 plus countries that have submitted targets in the online reporting tool. And if I look at what has been submitted, you can actually see that already almost every country has submitted a target. 88% or 89% of countries have submitted a national target that's aligned with target 23 of the framework. And so I think that what we're seeing is that countries really are taking this commitment to integrate the global biodiversity framework into national policy seriously, and most countries are aligning the national biodiversity strategy and national targets with all of the goals and targets of the framework, including the one on gender. As you just mentioned, I think the next step really is how to implement this, how to make it happen in reality, and how to monitor to make sure that we are on track to achieve the target on gender. And already we have a methodology in the binary indicator, which tries to break down some of the key questions to how do you develop a gender responsive policy for your national biodiversity strategy and action plan. And then there's a lot of work that's been done to this complementary indicator as well to further elaborate this binary methodology. I would say that I think that in terms of quantitative measures, there's a recommendation by the ATAG that's going to COP16 to disaggregate every indicator of the monitoring framework that can be disaggregated by gender. However, I would say that there is a lack of data for quantitative measures on gender. If you consider things like land ownership, which is also in the SDGs, the proportion of land that's owned by women, the data is very weak. The proportion of agricultural land that's owned by women, which is another SDG, this is also very weak. So the amount of land that is biodiversity rich, of course, we can't even start to think about how much of this is owned or managed by women because we just don't have the data at the current time. I know that there is a lot of work going into the land ownership issue in particular. And I think that this would really help inform a lot of the work that you guys are doing on how you monitor the role of women, because at the current time it is really difficult to get this data. And one of the issues is that much of the information that's collected thus far doesn't have this disaggregation. And so this, I think, is why when you look at what's going forward again from the ATAG to COP, the recommendation for target 23 to have a binary indicator really is, I think, a huge step forward already, because then this asks what types of policy are in place, and it asks countries what they're doing to improve their monitoring systems. And so I think that what we're going to see is as a first step to being able to hopefully monitor the role of women in a better way, in a more comprehensive way in the future. And so to me, I think we're already moving forward quite fast. I know that perhaps those of you in the meeting feel like you wish that you have a lot more information and we're not moving fast enough. But I do think that there has been a commitment from parties, and we'll continue to see that commitment at COP16 with the decision on the monitoring framework, in particular of how women are involved. There's also a strong emphasis on gender, I think, in most of the decisions, including especially the global review, which is the one that decides how the review at COP17, which will be the midterm review of the framework, will happen. I unfortunately, I think I'm going to cut myself off because I am under the impression that no one can really hear me very well. So I apologize. I am not sure what is wrong with my sound, but I'll hand off over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I have managed to put some of the points that you brought out in the chat, but this is very important information from the review of the NDSAPs that nearly 88% countries have aligned Target 23 with national targets. So the the commitment is there. We will have to figure out the ways in which data and policies can be implemented. And today's webinar is going to address some of these, some of the ways in which some of the panelists have been able to do this. Thank you so much, Ms. Jillian. Can we move on to the next slide? Yes. So before we get into the panel discussion, just to provide a brief context to this webinar, we all know that at COP15, parties adopted Target 23. This has followed nearly 100 decisions of the CBD since the first COP that have specifically referenced gender, and it reached a peak of 17 decisions at COP15 in 2022. COP10 was integral because it called for the mainstreaming of gender in all the programs of work under the CBD, and it urged parties to promote gender mainstreaming in developing, implementing, and revising the NDSAPs. Next. So at COP15, the post-2020 Gender Plan of Action was also adopted, which is a guide map for supporting the gender responsive implementation of the KMGBF. It lays down 30 indicative actions which are to be achieved by parties, major stakeholders, the CBD Secretariat, and other relevant organizations, women's organizations, and networks. And there are three expected outcomes which it is supposed to advance. The first is the creation of equal opportunities for and capacity building of women and girls to contribute to the objectives of the CBD. Next slide. The second expected outcome is to address the perspective, interests, needs, and human rights of all, especially women and girls, in biodiversity planning, policy, and programming decisions. Next slide. And the last is the creation of enabling conditions to ensure the gender responsive implementation of the KMGBF. Next slide. The monitoring framework comprises a set of agreed indicators for tracking the progress towards the goals and targets. And it has identified a binary indicator for Target 23, a set of 3 component and 4 complementary indicators for the monitoring and review of Target 3 based on SDG indicators. It is important to note that while these indicators are based on aspects of political representation, access to land tenure, and land rights, as well as inclusive decision making, several aspects of gender equality have not been adequately addressed. So therefore, it is essential to recognize that several targets within the monitoring framework are relevant to women and girls. Next slide. During Subset 26, parties as well as the ARTEC have pointed towards the need towards disaggregation of indicators related to all the targets so that the aspects of gender can be revealed, monitored, and reviewed in all areas of biodiversity conservation. Next slide. SBSTA has also noted the process towards the development of an indicator methodology for the national implementation of the Gender Plan of Action, which currently sits as a component indicator in the monitoring framework. And it's our great honor to say that Women for Biodiversity and UNEP WCMC have collaborated with parties and major stakeholders to develop this indicator. And we are hoping that we can showcase it during COP16 and parties can adopt it. Having said that, we know that several parties to the CBD have engaged with gender and biodiversity issues at the policy level, and are trying to address the gaps in the monitoring framework targets towards preparing NBSAPs. It is important to understand and discuss these policies and derive key learnings for gender responsive implementation of the framework. It is also important to understand and acknowledge the challenges that parties are facing towards collection of gender disaggregated data, monitoring, review of implementation of the monitoring framework in a gender responsive manner, so that capacities can be built to address these challenges. This webinar is an effort towards understanding the efforts of some of the parties towards building policies that are mainstreaming gender considerations into biodiversity planning and implementation, and to also hear some of the challenges that they are facing. Next slide. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists who have joined our session today to talk about their contexts and how they have incorporated gender in biodiversity planning. Let me introduce them to you. And we will also put in their bios in the chat box so that we are not spending too much time. I would like to first thank Ms. Winnie Marango, who is currently serving the Vanuatu government in monitoring, evaluation, and supporting the review of Vanuatu's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to align with the Global Biodiversity Framework. We have Ms. Amel Ibrahim, who is the Gender and Biodiversity Focal Point of the CBD for Sudan. She has been serving the Higher Council for Environment and Natural Resources as an environmental officer for 9 years. We then have Ms. Patience Dunya, who is the gender focal point at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development at the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She is joined by Ms. Nana Molo, who was the previous gender focal point at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Next slide. We also have Ms. Sikizwa Polambi, Ms. Lynn Jacobs, Mr. John Wilson, and Ms. Vanessa Matukana, who are with the Western Cape government in South Africa. And we also have Ms. Rendani Malwela, and together they joined the team that worked on a gender gap analysis and human rights for the Provincial Biodiversity and Strategic Action Plan. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining. And let me begin by asking our panelists the first question about why they think it is crucial to integrate gender in monitoring and implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, especially in the context of their countries. If Ms. Amel can take that question first. Ms. Amel, I would like you to take the floor.
Hello?
Yes,
Can
Ms.
you hear
Amel,
me?
we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Good morning and good day, all of you. First of all, I'm very appreciated to being one of presenter of this panel. Thank you, Women for Biodiversity. I hope the internet network going good, especially today is weekend and due to power outage, and since I'm at the home for the weekend, I will turn off the camera. Okay. Well, I will start with a short background about Sudan and then current situation in this year. Okay.
Yes, Ms. Amel, you can go ahead. We can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, Miss
Yes,
Amir.
yes. So that's Sudan officially, the Republic of Sudan is the country in Northeast Africa. It borders the Central Africa, Chad, Libya, Egypt, Red Sea, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Population in Sudan is more than 50 million people as of 2024. And the area is 1,886,068 square kilometers. It's a very huge country. Is the one of the largest three countries after Congo, Democratic of Congo, and Algeria. Sudan is rich of biodiversity with marine protected area, 2 marine protected area, 1 mountain protected area, and 4 desert protected area. In April 2023 and until now, the war in Sudan has been started between Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support militia due to coup to seize power. The war affected on 6 states out of 18 states, displacement, citizen, and death. No production in this period, no services, inability to manage natural resources, and destruction of nature. Do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Mary,
Hello?
we can hear you. We can hear
Yes.
you.
About the yes, and of course, its impact extended to other 18 states. In the part of subject of this webinar, gender responsive natural resources management for peace, natural resources and the environment can contribute to peace building through economic development and the generation of employment, while cooperation over the management of shared natural resources provides new opportunities for peace building. And trajectories of human conflict have direct and indirect impact on biodiversity and all ecosystem function. Land use change, over exploitation, greenhouse gases, production and resulting climate change, pollution, and spread of non-native species. Yes. Wait. Important of natural resources management for peace. Natural resources and environment okay, let's go to gender responsive natural resources. Understanding the linkage between gender relationships and the environment means achieving better analysis of pattern of use, knowledge, and skills regarding conservation and sustainable use of nature. Yes. For instance, due to gender differences in roles and responsibilities, women in rural Asia and Africa are usually the main collectors of wild plant food, while men tend to focus on harvesting timber and wild meat. As a result, women and men develop different knowledge about different species, their use, as well as to manage them. In Sudan, there is a very successful project
I think Miss Amel has dropped off. Um, we can ask her to join in, and if it's possible for the panelists, it would be really nice if you could put your videos on for the panel discussion. And if I can ask um, the panelists from South Africa if they can answer the first question. I'll ask the question again. Why is it crucial to integrate gender in the monitoring and implementation of the GBF in the context of South Africa?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. Given South Africa's history of gender and racial discrimination, gender-responsive monitoring and implementation are crucial to address historical inequality and to promote inclusivity. During apartheid era, South Africa was characterized by racial segregation and discrimination. The criteria upon which segregation and discrimination occurred share intersectionality within other characteristics such as gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, ethnic or social origin, could be color, sexual orientation, age, disability, religion, conscious, belief, culture, language, and birth. So joint effort to bring about a new, more equitable South Africa were identified as critical. To redress the historical injustice and latent inequalities arising from this discrimination, South Africa enshrined social equality in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. This decision was made to ensure that principles of fairness and equal opportunities will guide the nation's policies and practices. As a result, inclusivity and equity also feature heavily within national legislations, such as Employment Equity Act, which we call it EE Act 5 of 1998, which aims to promote fair employment practices and eliminate discrimination in the workplace by ensuring equal opportunities for all employees. Labor Relations Act 66 of 1995, which focuses on fostering fair labor practices, improving industrial relations, and protecting workers' rights. Lastly, Promotion of Equity and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act 4 of 2000, which seeks to combat discrimination and promote equality throughout society and ensuring that all individuals have access to rights and opportunities without bias. Together, these laws work to address positive feedback loops and maintain or exacerbate existing inequality within South Africa and to safeguard against the establishment of new inequalities. So the realization of the new democratic South Africa that was envisioned in 1994, general elections required the eradication of social and economic inequalities, especially those that are systematic in nature and remaining from historical colonialism, apartheid, and patriarchy. South Africa continues to face significant gender inequalities in various aspects of society, although there are promising indications that equality between men and women is improving, such as women are now outnumbering men in higher education in South Africa, and girls are more likely to finish school than boys. So nevertheless, unemployment within women who are also youth was recorded by Statistics South Africa as of 49.4% in the year 2024, which is 3.9% higher than the national youth average of the same period, which was 45.5%. So policy development efforts must be inclusive to truly effective. Gender-responsive frameworks ensure that unique needs, experiences, and perspectives of all gender are considered during the planning, the implementing of policies towards promoting fairness, economic growth, and social progress for all who inhabit South Africa. Most important item, the state may not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against anyone on one or more grounds. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Winnie, if I can ask you to take the question. Why is it crucial to indicate gender in the monitoring and implementation of the GBF in the context of Vanuatu? You have to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry. So thank you for the question. Vanuatu is a nation with strong traditional gender roles, which can influence how resources are managed and decisions are made. We have women back in Vanuatu, especially in rural and remote communities, who are often the primary caretakers of our natural resources, like water, food, and etc. They are directly affected by the environmental changes, making their involvement critical for sustainable biodiversity management. Gender responsive monitoring, it ensures that the voices of our women are included in decision-making processes, leading to more comprehensive, effective biodiversity conservation efforts. So the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework emphasizes on the need of gender equality in biodiversity, aligning with Vanuatu's commitment to international standards. So for examples, we have women that are members of the conservation committees in our local and remote communities. And we also have women that are chairs of the committees as well, the conservation committees. So far in Vanuatu, we have 16 registered community conservation areas. And we also have women that are part of the CCA ranges. And these ranges conducted biodiversity rapid assessments, and they also do monitoring and assessment of population count, diversity, distribution range, also location of different species in the key biodiversity areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morango. I would now like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ms. Dunia, Ms. Molo, if you could take the question.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Oui, c'est Madame Nana Molo de la République démocratique du Congo.
Oui, moi c'est Madame Patience Donia de la République démocratique du Congo.
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la question. En ce qui concerne la République démocratique du Congo, l'intégration du genre dans la préservation de la biodiversité est cruciale, vraiment cruciale, parce que les femmes de mon pays jouent un rôle très essentiel dans la transmission des connaissances traditionnelles, le renforcement de la résilience communautaire face au changement climatique et aussi à la promotion d'un leadership féminin pour des solutions environnementales inclusives et aussi efficaces. Dans les communautés locales, les femmes jouent un rôle très essentiel. Très essentiel et direct même à la préservation et à la détérioration de la biodiversité. Si les femmes sont sensibilisées, elles jouent un rôle direct dans la préservation. Si elles ne sont pas sensibilisées, c'est dans la détérioration de la biodiversité. Leur proximité constante avec la nature et leur utilisation de recherche de ressources plutôt naturelles comme source de revenus et de subsistance dans la collecte de produits forestiers non lignés les amène à gérer le moyen de subsistance en s'appuyant sur ces ressources naturelles. Je donne un exemple dans la foresterie communautaire. Nous avons les APAC. Malgré les stéréotypes, les obstacles locaux, leur participation et leur consultation sont cruciales pour obtenir également le consentement et garantir une approche inclusive et équitable. Je donnerai encore un autre exemple en ce qui concerne les concessions forestières des communautés locales. Par exemple, dans la province du Maniema, la coopération allemande a travaillé avec tant d'autres partenaires et elle a appuyé plusieurs acteurs pour la mise en œuvre de la coordination, mise en place plutôt de la coordination et des communautés de gestion et dans lesquelles les femmes sont représentées. Et elle ne s'est pas limitée seulement au comité de gestion, mais également, elles étaient présentes aussi dans les communautés locaux de développement. Et elles ont participé à l'élaboration de plusieurs plans de développement qui prennent en compte leurs perspectives et leurs besoins spécifiques. Bon, malgré les avancées que nous venons de citer si haut, nous venons de souligner, les femmes de la RDC restent vulnérables en raison de la pauvreté, des inégalités d'accès aux ressources, l'accès à la terre, des opportunités ainsi que des violences basées sur le genre. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have such a diverse variety of contexts in which gender is operating, and I would really like to thank the panelists for bringing that out for us in the context of these different countries. My second question is what are the policies and processes being implemented, already implemented or being implemented, which will ensure the gender effective implementation of the KM-GBF in the context of your countries? So if I could give the floor to South Africa first.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. And thank you for the question and the opportunity presented to us as well. So as mentioned as per response in question 1, that gender responsiveness is crucial in policy development, policy implementation, as well as subsequently monitoring. So in our context, at a high level politically, key policies that we actually considered to support effective gender incorporation, so as to promote gender equality and inclusivity, giving us direction and life to the constitutional imperative mentioned earlier in our response. We actually used the policies to actually give life to the gender and human rights gap analysis that we undertook in 2022. So the incorporation of gender perspectives into the Western Cape government policies included assessments undertaken internally within our department on existing and newly policies. This was done to actually evaluate the responsiveness to gender and human rights issues, as we can say, looking at priority groups. So the assessments that we undertook actually were done to determine whether the policies are gender neutral, gender blind, gender responsive, and or gender transformative. And the assessments were guided by a guideline that was actually developed internally within our Western Cape Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. And the guideline that we used was called A Practical Guide to Mainstream Gender into Public Policy. To date, to mention several assessments that were undertaken on gender and human rights gap analysis within our department was the coastal management plan that was done in 2022, a climate change response strategy that was done in 2021, an air quality management plan that was done in 2021, and our very own within our biodiversity management unit, which is the Provincial Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan that was done in 2022. So from our PBSAP, we call it a PBSAP because it's quite a long name to pronounce. So at a high level reflection of the findings that we found from our gap analysis that we undertook, it revealed that looking at the visions and goals of the plan, it was actually written in a gender neutral manner. However, when we took a deeper review at the plan's core and enabling strategic objectives, its indicators, targets, and actions, it actually showed that indeed the PBSAP was gender blind, not giving recognition to the roles and responsibilities of the marginalized and or else priority groupings. So as a result, the continued implementation of the PBSAP in an unresponsive manner would actually have indirectly discriminated against the inhabitants within the Western Cape government in South Africa. So therefore, the gap analysis that we undertook concluded by putting forward a number of recommendations for consideration within the PBSAP that is actually under review within the year that we publicized the gap analysis. I'll give on to my colleague.
Hi, everybody, and also very appreciative of the opportunity to share some of the work that we've done with you all. I think what I'd like to just do is a little bit of context setting. So the people you're speaking to on our side are actually what we call the gender champions. They were the task team with undertaking the gender gap analysis of the PBSAP. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of what that analysis looked like. So Likizwa has mentioned the gap analysis. Our gap analysis consisted of 3 phases. The first is almost a planning phase where you grapple with the actual policy in review. So what is the scope of the policy? What are the anticipated impacts from a gender perspective of that policy? Then based on that, you undertake a literature review, both in terms of the scope and also the impact to try and understand the gender sensitivities or the gender and human rights sensitivities because of the intersectionality we spoke about earlier on. Just to say that that was probably one of the barriers, and we'll touch on it a bit later, is that we don't have a plethora of sources when it comes to gender data. So we kind of were a little bit in the dark looking at international case studies, which is very dangerous. You don't want to assume things when it comes to community management, etc. You then use that information to sort of form a mental picture of what a gender responsive policy would look like. Minal, please just tell me if my internet is coming in and out. It says that I've got a slow internet connection. Thank you. And then you identify stakeholders and a stakeholder sort of planning process when you would engage with certain people. So that was the gap analysis we undertook. That was the first phase. The second phase was actually evaluating the policy and coming up with the recommendations, which Likizwa's already covered. And then I'm cheekily going to say there's a 4th phase. So the 3rd phase was the recommendations. The 4th phase is actually giving it life. And I think that's where we focused at the moment. And we'll touch on that a bit later. It's giving life to those recommendations and actually driving the change that you put forward. In our case, we don't have resources to employ service providers, so it's done in-house. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. And if we can move on to Ms. Amel. Ms. Amel, the question that we are looking at is, what are the policies and processes implemented that will ensure gender effective implementation of the framework in your country? Ms. Amel, can you hear me? You're on mute, Ms. Amel. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Like this, yes?
Yes.
Hello. We developed the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan 2024, which included the 23 goals, including goal target 23, which is completely new and had not been included in previous national biodiversity plans for Sudan. We started with a gender committee, and it's formed, distributed to the relevant authorities and those who concerned to gender. It is correctable and changeable. And we, in the next phase, we will put the action plan and action plan activities. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amel. If we can have,
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, Ms. Amel, we can hear you. Oh, she's dropped off. Okay, if we can hear from Ms. Marango about Vanuatu's policies.
Thank you. So for Vanuatu in August 2021, our Prime Minister launched the National Gender Equality Policy 2020 to 2021. The National Gender Equality Policy contains strategic areas addressing ending violence against women and girls, women's economic empowerment, women's civic participation and leadership, climate and disaster resilience, and gender mainstreaming across sectors to ensure that services are attainable by women, men, girls, and boys. So there is a all of government approach across sectors to achieve gender equality in the 5 strategic area of the policy, which contribute to the society, economy, and environment pillar in the National Sustainable Development Plan. The Vanuatu Gender Equality Policy serves as a framework for promoting gender equality across all sectors, including environmental conservation, and it aims to integrate gender perspectives into other policies, programs, and actions, or the actions plan. So Vanuatu has begun to integrate gender consideration into its environmental policy, ensuring that women's role in biodiversity conservation are recognized and supported through the conservation areas and other community environmental activities, as I mentioned earlier in the first question. Some of the examples. Also, with the focus of ensuring that women are included in leadership and decision-making roles within our conservation projects implemented by our partners. We also currently at the stage of reviewing our NPSAP, and we've noticed that the previous NPSAP often incorporated gender. So we have now developed new targets for gender under target 23, and we hope that the review of the new NPSAP will have gender targets and also working towards integrating gender consideration into the implementation of the NPSAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marango. Can we also hear from our colleagues at TRC? What are the policies that have already been implemented and are under review for implementation to ensure gender responsiveness?
Oui, s'il vous plaît, c'est la RDC. C'est à la RDC de répondre? OK. Merci beaucoup. Par rapport à la politique, nous disons que il y a la loi sur la parité homme-femme et il y a tant d'autres initiatives qui soutiennent l'égalité de genre, qui renforcent la participation et la prise de décision de femmes dans tous les secteurs, qui régulent même l'exploitation des ressources naturelles et protègent les écosystèmes fragiles avec une intégration croissante des perspectives de genre dans la conservation de la biodiversité, et il y a même des accords internationaux. Bien que de politiques comme la loi forestière et la loi sur la conservation de la nature commencent à intégrer les éléments de genre pour une participation équitable de femmes, des défis subsistent en tout cas en matière d'autonomisation, notamment en termes d'éducation, d'opportunités économiques et de prise de décision. Il est impératif de renforcer les efforts visant à promouvoir l'autonomisation de femmes, à combattre les discriminations et à assurer leur pleine participation pour un développement durable et inclusif en RDC. Je dirais que dans le cadre de la prise en compte du genre dans le processus et politique du ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable, en début de cette année qui vient de commencer, nous avons fait une évaluation sur l'intégration du genre dans les politiques, dans les stratégies, le programme et les projets du ministère de l'Environnement et du Développement durable. Et cela a été mené en collaboration avec le 21 point focal ou auxiliaire genre du ministère de l'Environnement. Et c'était dans le but de faire le point sur la situation actuelle de cette intégration. Le résultat de cette évaluation nous révèle que la prise en compte du genre était inefficace dans certaines politiques, dans certaines stratégies, programmes et même projets, parfois même peu explicites dans d'autres documents. Pour donner suite à ces constatations, et il y a même à d'autres recommandations, un guide d'intégration du genre a été élaboré. Et c'est là, bien sûr, avec la collaboration de ces 21 points focaux du genre de notre ministère. L'initiative, c'était avec la direction d'études et planification et avec le membre de la cellule du genre de notre ministère. Ces guides dont je viens de faire allusion présentement nous donnent l'avantage d'autoriser les auxiliaires genre, donc le point focal genre, à influencer l'intégration du genre dans chaque direction du ministère de l'Environnement, en incluant bien sûr leur participation lors de l'élaboration de politiques et stratégies et voire même programmes du ministère de l'Environnement. Et il contient également, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, des recommandations spécifiques à certains acteurs internes du ministère de l'Environnement et même des actions à entreprendre pour faciliter l'intégration du genre dans ces processus et même des activités internes du genre, ainsi que dans l'actualisation et même dans la conception de politiques, stratégies et programmes et projets, parce qu'il y a beaucoup de stratégies qui sont en cours d'élaboration. En ce qui concerne les activités, il est essentiel de renforcer vraiment les capacités des acteurs à tout niveau, afin d'améliorer la compréhension du genre, parce que la compréhension du genre elle-même pose problème. C'est ce qui bloque aussi l'intégration de la dimension genre dans le politique. Les compétences nécessaires pour mettre en œuvre l'approche genre de manière efficace à l'intérieur. Nous pouvons également souligner que nous avons 21 auxiliaires genre. Déjà, la présence de ces 21 points focaux genre ou auxiliaires genre au sein de notre ministère, c'est un avantage qui va nous permettre d'influencer l'intégration de la dimension genre, l'inclusion de la dimension genre. Et c'est aussi une façon de responsabiliser ces points focaux à collecter les données sur la prise en compte du genre à l'interne tout comme à l'externe. Voilà, ce sont là quelques éléments que nous pouvons donner la RDC quant à la politique, le politique et le processus de mise en œuvre. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all the panelists. There's definitely a need to integrate gender in a way that is spread across the ministries, as you have pointed out, and also to have people with gender expertise involved in the planning processes. You have briefly talked about some of the challenges that have come out, but I would like if you could talk about the challenges, especially in monitoring and reporting some of the gender responsiveness across the targets, and also what are some of the solutions that you have come up with. So if I could ask Ms. Marango to take this question. What are some of the challenges that you've been facing in monitoring and reporting, and what are the solutions that Vanuatu has come up with?
Okay, thank you. So firstly, one of the primary challenges is the lack of disaggregated data, and it makes it difficult to monitor gender-specific impacts and contributions. A good example is our previous NPSAP was, it doesn't have, like I mentioned before, like we don't have a gender target in the previous NPSAP, and also there was no tools for us to be able to measure or monitor the gender specific impacts and contributions, and also cultural norms in some of our communities may also resist the inclusion of women in decision-making roles, which will pose a barrier to gender responsive monitoring, and also limited resources, especially financially, technically, and human resource. It can also hinder the effective monitoring and reporting of gender-related outcomes in biodiversity projects. Some of the solutions that we can, Vanuatu can take on to address these challenges is to develop and implement systems to collect and analyze gender disaggregated data, ensuring that the impacts of biodiversity initiatives for both women and men are accurately captured. Also, programs or projects that raise awareness about the importance of gender equality in biodiversity conservations aimed at both women and men to shift the cultural norms. Working with international NGOs and local communities to support gender responsive monitoring and reporting, also sharing resources and adapt to the best practice. And also another solution would be the role of women in conservation, and encouraging more and more women to be part of the structure of the governing bodies of future conservation areas that we will be setting up, or the project partners will be setting up to encourage more and more women to be in the governing structures. And some of the examples that I would like to share is that Vanuatu, as a project that was funded by the UNDP, and it has successfully mainstreaming gender and social inclusion consideration into conservation efforts. And these include conducting comprehensive gender and social inclusion assessments to inform the design and implementation of the community-based conservation activities, but also ensuring that women, youth, and marginalized groups have equal opportunities to participate in and benefit from these initiatives. So I would like to close with emphasizing the critical role that gender-responsive approaches play in achieving the goals of the KM-GBF in Vanuatu. But with some of the progress made, we think there is still a lot of work to be done. And I would like to encourage continuous support for gender mainstreaming in biodiversity initiatives and continuous collaboration with our partners. Also, we would like to seek funding allocation to help us achieve the KM-GBF through our implementation of the MPSAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maranko. If I can ask the same question to Ms. Amel, what are some of the challenges that are emerging for monitoring and reporting, and what are the solutions that Sudan is employing? I think we have lost Ms. Amel. So can I ask the colleagues from DRC to
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la question. Actuellement, il est complexe d'aborder la question des suivis genre au sein du ministère de l'Environnement en RDC, car il est fréquent de constater un manquement à intégrer les aspects genre dans des divers rapports produits par le ministère de l'Environnement. Et cela ne sous-entend pas que les données n'existent pas, mais plutôt que ces aspects sont souvent négligés lors des rapportages. Et il est crucial de sensibiliser régulièrement nos autorités et de renforcer les capacités des agents du ministère de l'Environnement en matière de genre et de son importance. Lors des réunions, les intervenants évoquent souvent l'intégration de la dimension genre à travers la participation des femmes aux activités. Mais évaluer l'impact de ces actions sur les femmes dans les contextes de la biodiversité pour documenter leur contribution demeure difficile. C'est un domaine où les points focaux genre n'ont pas encore pleinement pénétré. Mais toutefois, avec l'aide des guides de la stratégie élaborée, nous prévoyons établir un réseau des points focaux pour se soutenir mutuellement et se renforcer à quand des besoins, et afin de garantir une réelle intégration du genre au sein du ministère de l'Environnement, tout en collaborant avec le ministère du genre pour veiller au respect de la politique nationale sur le genre et bénéficier de leur expertise. Nous envisageons également de collaborer avec des ONG des femmes qui mettent en œuvre les activités aux côtés des femmes au niveau local pour assurer cette inclusion et recueillir les succès de cette intégration du genre au sein des communautés. Voilà un peu quelques réponses par rapport à la question.
Thank you so much. I can see that Ms. Amel is here again. She's dropped off. Okay. Can we ask South Africa then to talk about some of the challenges and also the solutions?
Thanks, Amal, for the opportunity. So for us, one of the biggest challenges, and many of the other speakers, they also alluded to it or mentioned it, and that is that there is a real shortage of empirical data to inform gender and human rights strategies. And without this data, obviously, it's really difficult to measure trends, to measure progress. But from the little information that we do have, it does show that there is a significant variation between different communities, between different provinces, even countries. And that is why it's incredibly risky for governments to adopt a one-size-fits-all approach to gender-responsive measures. The unique context of each community is critical in shaping how we address gender issues, and it's essential that governments don't implement policies that misses the mark because they didn't account for those local nuances. So that it essentially brings me to an important point, and that is that we need to fill this data gap, and we need to do so as quickly as possible. Establishing those baselines, it will allow us to track progress and create meaningful trends to essentially guide our future actions. But we can't wait till we have the perfect data in order for us to act. So we need to act as well as simultaneously work towards understanding the context in which the services are delivered. So as my colleague Takizwa mentioned, we undertook a gender gap analysis on our biodiversity policy. And a key takeaway from that analysis was that there's a need to refine processes that will help to provide context for policy development. And in response to that need, our department also drafted a good practice note that assists officials to engage with marginalized communities more effectively in policy development. However, another challenge is that contextualizing policy is not without its costs. South Africa does face significant resource constraints, and establishing that golden standard for gender responsiveness overnight is just not feasible. So that is essentially why we have taken an iterative approach. So by making incremental adjustments and monitoring those outcomes, and then refining our approach, we aim to progressively realize that golden standard over time. So this method essentially, it allows us to respond to inequalities with the data that we do have while we are working towards collecting better information for the future. So this approach, it's not only to fill that gender data gap, but it's essentially to embed gender transformative practices into the fabric of how services are delivered, and ensuring that feedback loops or strong feedback loops exist to counter the drivers or the drivers of inequality, essentially. So I want to give over to my colleague John. He will delve more deeply into our good practice note that we've developed. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lynn. So just a little bit on the good practice notes. We engaged, like Lynn said, we engaged with actual on-the-ground officials delivering services to communities. Our gap analysis identified conservation management, and I've heard the other panelists also raising conservation management being a real concern, because we felt that had quite a large impact from a gender, they had large gender or many gender sensitivities. So we engaged with what we call the stakeholder engagement officials for their first-hand accounts of dealing with communities and gender sensitivities through a workshop process, also relying, Minal, as you mentioned, on sort of experts who guided us in these engagements. And we're on our journey towards a guide. So it's going to be a document that these officials can rely on when it comes to engaging with communities to make sure they are truly mainstreaming gender and human rights considerations, and then also guiding them in terms of the data that needs to be collected in terms of monitoring responsiveness and impact around the gender targets. Just to give you a broad understanding of the barriers that we've encountered through this process, so there are themes that these officials have given us. The first is around improving the understanding of communities, community profiling, and then also relations. So as Lynn has mentioned, starting that process of collecting data, understanding the baselines of those communities so that we can actually track impact. If we're not monitoring it, we're not managing it. So really trying to start that process, and then also through that, trying to encourage improved relations. We believe that many of these people probably are disenfranchised through these processes, so they're probably reluctant to engage in official processes because they haven't had success in the past. It's the same departments, same legislation, same officials, but we're asking them to trust us that it's going to be a different outcome. So building that relationship with communities. The second is language and communication. South Africa is blessed with 11 official languages and sign language, so 12 official languages in total, which makes it really tricky to make sure that messages are landing, that people are able to participate freely and able to communicate well. So we have to really focus on that aspect of service delivery. And then also trying to improve communication both from top down, so decision takers relaying why decisions were taken, but then also from bottom up for the ground level communities to relay reality to decision makers. We also need to work on skills development. I've heard that's being mentioned as well by the other panelists, both for the officials and for the communities, trying to capacitate both sets of stakeholders to make sure that the process is sort of expedited. And then also the establishment of communities of practice. And that's kind of what we're proposing with this guide, that we establish a community of practice that people can use to contextualize their service delivery. And then lastly, policy change. It takes a long time, but our policies are world-class. I think South Africa's got some great policies. They're exceptionally difficult to understand, both at an official level and then also at the community level. So some capacity building there as well. There's also a lot of overlap, so we need to rationalize those laws a bit to try and simplify things if we can, and then elevate the importance of traditional ecological knowledge and community engagement within these. Lastly, most of our legislation, like Vanessa mentioned, because it's a constitutional imperative, reflects equality. So all preambles reflect an element of equality, but they often lack detail in terms of how that equality will actually play out in reality. And I think our legislation needs to unpack that a little bit more. So this is an emerging space, and we're not gender experts, but we're doing what we can. And as Lynn has said, it's iterative, and we hope to achieve that golden standard in years to come.
Thank you so much. Yes, we had one question for South Africa, which I think you have answered already, is the monitoring systems that have been put in place to ensure whether these laws are applicable in South Africa. I think you did mention the loop that you were talking about, that whatever policies you are implementing or whatever actions towards implementation are being taken are coming back. And you are refining them. But would you like to take this question?
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite a tricky one to answer because we are dealing with this dearth of information. So the first thing, and I think many people have touched on it, is disaggregated data. But then when it comes to the monitoring of implementation, we've got the PBSAP, the Provincial Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. The PBSAP actually includes certain actions and targets and indicators within it around gender. This iteration is quite light. I think our main concern is that we don't fully understand the inequalities in this space. And as a result, it's probably more target 22, so trying to get active participation and make sure that we're actually getting the information in order for us to be able to start setting baselines and tracking. So we use that mechanism through the actual PBSAP, but then also the good practice note will have an M&E framework with it, which will set out targets of sort of measuring gender responsiveness and gender inclusion, as well as other human rights elements. And then we will use that as sort of a benchmark to see how we're progressing within the endeavor. But it's still an emerging space. I think that's the next area where we need to spend time, is really unpacking those elements. So hopefully in a year or two's time, we'll have a much better, much consolidated response to that question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson. I think we have Ms. Amel now, and Ms. Amel, if you would like to take the last question, which is, what are some of the challenges when it comes to monitoring and reporting gender responsiveness, and if there are any solutions that Sudan is employing?
Okay, our challenges in Sudan is very difficult. Of course, with this situation with war, we will delay the insecure states and focus on secure states, which are less than 12. Okay, that means gender action plan would not be complete for covered all areas. What can we how can we deal of this problem? Of course, we can't the management the resources, natural resources. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amel. I think we are going to have to cut short on the question and answer session, but it would be great if the panelists can share links to some of the policies and documents that they're coming up with that you all spoke about in the chat box, so that our participants get to see some of these very interesting methods that you have devised, policies that the countries have come up with to actually ensure gender implementation. Really, thank you so much for being a part of this and for agreeing to be panelists and sharing your experiences. We have Sumina.
Yeah, sorry, Meenal, I just had to step in. Can we request the panelists to open their video so that I can just take a quick photo of the
Oh,
panel?
yes. Yes, if all of us can open our videos, and Sumina will just take a quick picture. Um,
Minal, sorry, we're going to try and turn off the background so you can get all of us, if that's
yes,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, there we go. All right, sorry, there are many of us on this side.
Bear with me for just 2 seconds. Sorry. Yep. All right, everybody smile. Thank you. And Mino will take a final photo at the end of the. Oh, Amel turned on her camera now. Can we take one more photo, please? Everybody. Smile. Okay, that looks good. Mino, just one more photo at the end of the webinar, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. We do have Mr. Wenge Nyongo from UN Women, and I would like to ask him to end this session today. Thank you so much, Wenge, for first of all collaborating with us on this, and we know that UN Women has come up with a lot of policies which parties can use. So if you could just talk about that and also end the session today, I'll just give the floor to you.
Right. No, thank you so much, Minal, for having us here. It's been a pleasure to work with you in the preparation for this webinar. May I just first thank all the speakers that have been here today, from Sudan, Vanuatu, the DRC, South Africa, and our opening remarks that came from Tina and Gillian. And really also to thank you, Minal, for the excellent moderation of this webinar. I think we've heard a number of common threads through the conversations today. One major one being that women are primary interlocutors with natural resources, and yet they continue to face several challenges. Gendered roles are always dominant determinants of their participation in biodiversity action. Women are not participating enough, or actually not effectively participating in governance and decision making, and resourcing the work on the integration of gender equality considerations in biodiversity action, monitoring, and implementation is also very limited. I think the issue of gender disaggregated data has been brought up so much throughout the conversations, whether it be at global or even at the national or provincial levels, as we've heard from the BBSAP from South Africa. And yet there are so many things that are happening on the ground that are working to help resolve all these challenges. So really kudos for all the excellent examples that we've heard today, including working with NGOs, strengthening the presence of women in governance structures, and so on and so forth. For UN Women, I think I would like to quickly share that our baseline for the work that we're actually doing at the moment is the 66th Commission on the Status of Women, which was held in 2022, I believe, and there are great conclusions from that. I think I would encourage you to go and look at paragraph 62, which is our longest paragraph that has got a lot of recommendations on how we can actually address a number of or many of these issues as agreed by member states of the United Nations, with the participation of all of you, including other stakeholders in that process. The other thing is, do engage with us. We have our Women Count program, which is helping to generate disaggregated data and gender statistics on environment, including on biodiversity. The program is called Women Count. It's a global program, and we've done some work actually studying in the Pacific, where we've done most of it. Our engagement and moving on to various other countries across the globe. It's a one way we're trying to create in terms of offering reliable data for our use. I think one point that was made earlier, particularly from the DRC, was data may be available, but it may actually just not be accessible in a number of cases. And I tend to think we need to take this as an important revelation that we could actually try to find innovative ways of using quantitative data that has been available, but just not curated in a way that we can actually use it. Let me stop here, seeing that we've already gone over time, but thank you so much for having me, and really learned a lot from this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wenge. And again, thank you so much for our panelists for sparing this time and really engaging with us for this session. And the participants who have patiently sat through this. Thank you so much. Sumina, over to you.
Thanks, Meenal. If everybody could open their cameras so that I can just take a group photo, a virtual group photo. Please. It's okay if you don't want to. Nice. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna give the 1, 2, 3 countdown. Okay, everybody. So smile on 3. 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, and 3. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sumina. Thank you so much, interpreters, Gael and team. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you.
so much,
And
Meenal.
hopefully see you at COP16.
We're gonna have fun.